All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Spartan Talks. I hope everyone is doing well, and we're just so excited that you are with us for today's Spartan Talk. I am particularly excited about this morning's Spartan Talk. As you know, we'll be talking about baseball, which is not just America's pastime, but a personal favorite of mine, and so cannot be more excited that you are with us today. For those who don't know me, my name is Sam Chen. I have the privilege of teaching here at Northampton Community College, and is for the privilege of being your host here at Spartan Talks. Now, our speaker this morning needs no introduction, but I have the task of introducing him nonetheless. Dr. Michael McGovern currently serves as adjunct professor of history here at Northampton Community College, but previously served both as professor of history and vice president of academic affairs. He currently teaches, well, not this semester, but he typically teaches American History 1 and 2, as well as Civil War and Reconstruction. While not in Northampton, he serves on the Board of Trustees of St. Elizabeth University in New Jersey. And as you can guess, he's an avid baseball fan, particularly of the former Brooklyn Dodgers, the New York Yankees, and our hometown Philadelphia Phillies. This morning, Dr. McGovern will be talking about his musings on opening day, which is coming. And he says of the unimportant things in life, baseball may be the most important. And today he'll be offering some reflections on the role of baseball in American culture, some fanciful, a few literary, and others profoundly inconsequential, as he says. And I'm always reminded of Billy Beane's famous quote, "How can you not be romantic about baseball?" And certainly, I think we're in for a treat today. And so without any further ado, Dr. McGovern.
Thank you very much, Sam, and it's nice to be with you. Thanks for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. I'm going to screen share here. Let me do that and get up my PowerPoint. And before I do that, I'd like to remind everyone that opening day is, in fact, in Philadelphia here this coming Thursday. There we go. And spring training, whoops, I hope this isn't on a timer because I didn't want that to happen. Spring training usually begins around Valentine's Day. Pitchers and catchers report around Valentine's Day, and opening day, March 30th, April 1st, in that neck of the woods. That gives me about 6 weeks to think about baseball. And every team is undefeated. There are no stats. There are no botched plays. There are no managerial miscues. And I just kind of muse and enjoy myself thinking about the game itself. Here's a prop that I sometimes fool around with during the spring training days. For those of you that are not familiar with it, this is a 2-seam fastball. This is a 4-seam fastball. This is a changeup, and the aptly misnamed knuckleball, which is really thrown with the tips of the fingers. I also have a prop which I'm not going to wear, but I usually wear these hats to major league games, or in the case of the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, minor league games as well. So, what kind of things do I think about? Well, every spring, one thing I do is start off with a poem. Other than Len Roberts, from Northampton, my favorite contemporary poet is John Updike from Shillington, Pennsylvania, just outside Reading. And Updike wrote a beautiful poem about the meaning and substance of baseball. And bear with me, I'd like to read it maybe with a little bit of a dramatic edge, because I think it captures everything about the game. Here's what he says. It looks easy from a distance, easy and lazy even, until you stand up to the plate and see the fastball sailing inside an inch from your chin, or circle in the outfield straining to get a bead on a small black dot a city block or more high, a dark star that could fall on your head like a leaden meteor. The grass, the dirt, the deadly hops between your feet and overeager glove. Football can be learned and basketball finessed, but there is no hiding from baseball the fact that some are chosen and some are not. Those whose mitts feel too left-handed, who are scared at third base of the pulled line drive, and at first base are scared of the shortstop's wild throw that stretches you out like a gutted deer. There is nowhere to hide when the ball's spotlight swivels your way, and the chatter around you falls still and the mothers on the sidelines, your own among them, hold their breaths, and you whiff on a terrible pitch or in the infield achieve something so ridiculous with the ball that you blush for years. It's easy to do. Baseball was invented in America, where beneath the good cheer and sly jazz, the chance of failure is everybody's right, beginning with baseball. So I think that kind of says it in a nutshell. For those of you that have played, you know what it's like when that line drive comes at you. You know what it's like when you get a bad hop. And I think most of us who have played, boys and girls alike now, understand how embarrassed it is when you let a ball go through your feet with your mother and father watching from the stands. Updike captures, I think, the sense of failure, the sense of loss, of learning to live with loss. And it also reminds us that, a lot of academics, a lot of thinking people, a lot of artists, a lot of intellectuals seem to like the game. They like the symmetry, they like the nuance, the cadence of the game, the cerebral edges to the strategy. And what's even more remarkable to me is that while people think about baseball so much, it's almost entirely intuitive, as almost any athletic endeavor is entirely intuitive. I mean, you're not thinking about it while you're doing it. So, the players who are on the field and the managers who are calling the shots in the dugout are happily, blissfully, and completely oblivious to almost everything I've just said. They're just out there playing and enjoying the game. Another thing I do, speaking of John Updike, is I dust off a copy of the first essay that he ever had published in the New Yorker, October 22nd, 1960. He was only 28 years old when he published in Hub Fans Bid Kid Adieu about Ted Williams's last day at Fenway Park as a player. And I can pretty much guarantee you, I highly recommend that you read the entire essay. It's a pretty long essay, and you have to remind yourself from time to time that you're reading about a baseball game and not something from a Shakespearean tragedy. But I believe he was probably the first and only writer who ever described Boston's Fenway Park as a compromise between man's Euclidean determinations and nature's beguiling irregularities. That's Ted Williams on the right. He's probably best known that day for hitting a home run, his 521st, really a massive home run to right center field in Fenway Park in his last major league at bat. And Williams, of course, is one of the perennial and immortals of the game. That last home run, by the way, was delivered up by a local boy, Jack Fisher from Easton, Pennsylvania. Jack Fisher, you might remember his pub. He had a pub for many years on Freemansburg Avenue in Palmer Township called Jack's Place, and I believe he's still around and still playing golf. But Ted Williams was a very complex, enigmatic character. One of the great hitters of all time. In fact, his goal in professional baseball was to have people walk by him and say, "There goes the greatest hitter who ever lived." And he may have been right about that. Nobody's ever been able to figure out Ted Williams. He despised sports writers, called them the Knights of the Keyboard. He would go long stretches without acknowledging the fans. He would never tip his hat after hitting a home run as he ran back into the dugout. He was a Latino, maybe one of the first Latinos in the major leagues. His mother was a Spanish and Mexican woman from San Diego, but he never acknowledged her. He didn't get along with his mother, and so he did not acknowledge his Latin heritage. He hit 521 home runs in the major leagues, 2,600 hits, 19 times an All-Star, 2-time MVP in the American League. And consider this, that in the prime of his career, for 3 years during World War II and almost 2 years during the Korean War, he was absent because he was flying fighter planes for the U.S. Navy. So consider the numbers he would have put up if he had been around for those 5 years. And he still captured Updike's attention. So if you get a chance, you might want to really read that article. The other thing I think about baseball a lot, nobody can ever figure out how it got started. This picture is a photo I found a couple months ago of the Hoboken Knickerbockers of 1858. Okay. And the reason I like this photo is that it kind of resembles a baseball team. And I think you can probably figure out which guy is the manager. He's the one with the morning coat on and the tall silk hat. But the rest of them look a little bit like baseball players. Um, a lot of people take credit for it. We do know that Abner Doubleday did not invent it. One of the part of the lore of the game is that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in 1839. And if you ever get up to Cooperstown, New York, to the Hall of Fame, you will see Doubleday Field, which is named after him. Fine with that, but he didn't do it. The English, of course, take credit for it, as they do a lot of things here in the United States. Um, it's connected to cricket. It's connected to rounders. There are colonial etchings, woodcuts, I guess you'd call them, showing a game called base in the early colonial period in the English colonies. But there are other scholars who say that it goes back a lot longer than that. Has its origins in folk games from France and Scandinavia. And I did see one stained glass window in France with a woman holding what looks like a baseball bat and someone pitching a ball at her. And that's from the 13th century. So take your pick, but we do know that it began in or around New York City in the decades before the Civil War. But I kind of like the mythic aspects of it. It just kind of arose out of the mists without any logical provenance. Oops, let me go back again. I'm getting carried away here with my mythic titles, but heroic figures. I don't know whether these guys are heroic figures, but I've always liked the kind of rise and decline of players within the sport. Sometimes they're inevitable. Sometimes they're predictable. Most of the time they're predictable. Sometimes they even approach the pathos of Shakespearean tragedy. Put Babe Ruth in there because I find it absolutely personally impossible to ever discuss baseball without discussing Babe Ruth. So he's there. And I don't think his decline was anything but inevitable. He didn't take care of himself. He indulged himself all during his playing years. In many ways, he had insatiable appetites for just about everything that wasn't good for him. But he discovered in his late 30s that his legs were starting to go. And so he retired at the age of 38, wanted to be a manager, wanted to spend the rest of his life managing, and could never catch on with a club because almost all of his critics said, Ruth, you can't even manage yourself. How are you going to manage a team? And then in a very public interview in 1940, he started crying when he realized that his youth was over at the age of 40. Didn't last very long. He died at the age of 53 with throat cancer. But certainly, it's been 73 years since he died. And most people today, all you have to do is say the Babe, and they know exactly who you're talking about. Casey Stengel, another colorful character out of that golden age of baseball. 9 times he managed the New York Yankees in the 1950s, early 1960s to World Series championships. Hall of Fame manager. And then when the Yankees cut him loose for being too old, he was signed by the New York Mets when National League Baseball returned to New York City, and he became in his later years. And here you see him as in his Mets uniform, became the manager of the worst team in baseball history, the 1962 Mets. Won 40 games, they lost 120 games. And Casey's most memorable quote from that season: "Can't anybody here play this game?" So his number was retired by the Mets. His number was retired by the Yankees. He's certainly included among the monuments in center field at Yankee Stadium. But everyone remembers those final years with the lovable and losing New York Mets. Third on the list, and this is a sad case, Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds of the San Francisco Giants. Many of you probably remember him as one of the great hitters and great baseball players of the 1990s. If Barry Bonds had retired at the age of 37, he probably would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. But he, along with many others, had their careers end in scandal caused by the steroid crisis in baseball during that decade. At the age of 37, when many players' skills are beginning to decline rapidly, Bonds started hitting Ruthian home runs in Ruthian numbers. He managed to eclipse Mark McGwire's tainted home run record of 70 by hitting 73. And then he managed to pass Henry Aaron's 755, finishing up with 762 home runs. During that time, however, there were all kinds of rampant suspicions that he was using illegal drugs to improve his performance. PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, as they're known. That was never proven, although widely suspected. I remember a game in Philadelphia in which a fan came to the game in which they were playing the Giants dressed as a hypodermic needle and taunted Bonds all during the game. So here he is now, with holding probably the two most coveted records in baseball, and he's still not in the Hall of Fame. And he joins others from that era: Mark McGwire, Roger Clemens, Rafael Palmeiro, Lenny Dykstra from the Phillies, and one in particular, Brady Anderson, relatively minor player with the Milwaukee Brewers. In 1995, he hit 16 home runs. The next year, he hit 50. So he was pretty well burned out with these drugs. Will Bonds ever get in the Hall of Fame? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if he hadn't allegedly done what he did, he'd probably be there now. Steve Blass is a personal favorite of mine. Many of you probably have not heard of Steve Blass. He's a pitcher from the Pirates from Canaan, Connecticut. Pitched well in the late 1960s and took the Pirates to the 1971 World Championship or World Series Championship, won 2 games and finished just behind Roberto Clemente in the MVP, World Series MVP. Blass is probably best known, however, for the fact that when he returned to baseball the following year, he couldn't find the plate. He lost all control over the baseball. He stuck around for another year, and a year after that, the Pirates sent him down to the minor leagues, never to return. It's called Steve Blass disease, or the yips, as it's known in baseball and in other sports. He was never again able to throw a strike with that famous right arm of his, and so he became a Pirates broadcaster. He's retired now, but he became beloved as a Pirates broadcaster. Steve Sachs from the Dodgers, another player with the same problem, second baseman who couldn't throw the ball to first base. Chuck Knobloch from the Yankees, same problem, second baseman who couldn't throw the ball to first base all of a sudden. And in more recent times, what the heck was his name now? John Lester, from the left-handed pitcher from the Chicago Cubs, still active, could not throw a pickoff move to first base. Runners, when they got to first base, they knew they had a free rein because Lester would never, ever throw the ball to first base because he couldn't. So go figure that out. It's an intuitive game, and you'll never know. And then finally on this list, Roberto Clemente, again, another personal favorite of mine, arguably the greatest player of Puerto Rican heritage ever to play Major League Baseball. Played in the 1950s, came up during the 1950s, played through the 60s and through the 71 season. In one of his last at-bats in 1971, he got his 3,000th hit and became a national hero both in the United States and in Puerto Rico as well. And it ended in tragedy. He had always been very generous and helpful in his time. He spent a lot of money and time providing relief for victims of natural disasters. And on New Year's Eve, 1972, he and some others took off from Puerto Rico on their way to Managua, Nicaragua, to provide relief for earthquake victims there. And his plane crashed just outside the Puerto Rican waters. Body was never found. Body was never recovered, but went into the Hall of Fame. He also had the greatest throwing arm I've ever seen. I saw him play a couple times, and I remember a game in Philadelphia when he caught a ball at the base of the wall in right field and threw a perfect strike, no bounces, to home plate. Rather remarkable effort. It's an American game that tells the nation's story. And this is, again, reminiscent of the fact that baseball in many respects parallels the nation's history. People who like baseball, and they see in it, again, those kind of primal American values, rugged individualism. It's kind of a mano a mano, the pitcher on the mound and the batter at the plate. It's one-on-one to win or lose. The fall and redemption, the Puritan work ethic, all of these, values we tend to see in the game, whether they're there or not. But of course, the game also has a dark side, and the dark side parallels the dark side of American history as well. And the darkest part of the dark side, of course, is the fact that from roughly 1887 until 1947, African Americans were excluded by an unwritten, quote, gentleman's agreement from playing in Major League Baseball. Along the way, there were certain managers that wanted black players. John McGraw from the New York Giants actually tried to get several black players onto his team by having them identify as Native American Indians. That didn't work out. The commissioner of baseball in the 1920s, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who's famous for other things, notoriously upheld what was known as the color line. And so consequently, the elite baseball players of African American heritage were kind of forced to go their own way. And they founded what were then known as the Negro Leagues in 1920, and those leagues lasted until 1951. In January of this year, at long last, Major League Baseball has finally defined 7 of those old Negro Leagues as major league teams. So all of the records, all of the statistics of the great players who played in those Negro Leagues have now been incorporated into the records of Major League Baseball. And of course, the fellow on the left, sliding into home after stealing home in the World's 1955 or 56 World Series, is Jack Roosevelt Robinson. I think most people know the story of Jack Robinson. He's the one who broke the color line in 1947. The Dodgers signed him to their Montreal farm team, and then brought him up in April of 1947. And his story is well known. He endured all kinds of taunts and epithets and threats on his life, and insults from not only opposing teams and opposing managers, but from his own teammates as well. And he was under a directive from the general manager of the Dodgers, to not retaliate or say anything for a period of 2 years. And he didn't. He became a perennial all-star. He was an MVP in the National League. He was a hero of the 55 and 56 World Series. He was also a multifaceted athlete in many other ways. He was a track star and football player at UCLA. And he was a very strong character, and he had a great deal of pride in himself, a great deal of pride in being African American. And it wasn't an easy thing for him to swallow all that guff and that racism for 2 years, but he did it. And as a result, every major league team has retired his number 42. And in April every year, all the players wear number 42 in honor of Jack Robinson. By the way, that photo has been a source of controversy for decades, because Yogi Berra from the Yankees is the catcher in that photo, and Yogi swore till the day he died that Jackie Robinson was out sliding into home plate, but he was called safe. The fellow on the right, you may know the name, but that's Leroy Satchel Paige, another great player from the Negro Leagues and later the major leagues. But Satchel Paige may have been, we'll never know because of the color line, he may have been one of the greatest pitchers who ever played the game. He broke into professional baseball in 1926. And in the late 1940s, the Cleveland Indians brought him up at the age of 42. And he continued to win games with a famous pitch. He called it his hesitation pitch. It was a fastball, but he would stop at the top of his delivery for just a second to throw the timing of the batter off, and then deliver the pitch. Many managers wanted the hesitation pitch to be called a balk. The umpires disagreed, and they let him throw it. But he was so athletic and so gifted and skilled pitcher that he continued to pitch throughout his 40s in the major leagues, and then retired. But they brought him back. At the age of 59, and he pitched a game for the Kansas City Athletics at the age of 59, and got some people out. Not an exhibition game, a regular season game. So just a fantastic athlete. But again, one of those players from the Negro Leagues, their statistics don't mean as much because they didn't keep records. He claimed that he won close to 1,000 games, and maybe he did, but we'll never know. The barnstorm in those days too, what teams would do, major league teams in the offseason, they would barnstorm. Collection of all-stars would travel through the country playing exhibition games. And Bob Feller from the Cleveland Indians took a group of all-stars from the Negro Leagues, including Satchel Paige, on a barnstorming tour. Played several dozen games, and it was a pretty even, the Feller team was all white and the Satchel Paige team was all black. Pretty even competition all the way through. So they knew, white players knew they were playing against major leaguers. It's just that these great athletes never got a chance to show their stuff. And three of my favorites, this is from years ago, Willie Mays, Henry Aaron, and Joe DiMaggio. Willie Mays is still with us. He's 89 years old. His best years, of course, were with the New York Giants, and then they moved to San Francisco in 1958, and then the San Francisco Giants, and then he finished up his career with the New York Mets. But Mays, again, may have been, along with maybe Jackie Robinson and Jim Thorpe, may have been maybe the greatest athlete ever to play professional baseball. Like many players of that era, he began his career in the old Negro Leagues, which ended in 1951. He hit 660 home runs in the major leagues. He was twice the most valuable player in the National League, and 24 times selected to the All-Star team. So, at the time that he retired, his 660 home runs were second only to Babe Ruth's 714. So it gives you some idea as to how talented and gifted a player he was. He's also very well known for a catch in the 1954 World Series that he caught over his shoulder, running backwards toward the wall. Henry Aaron in the center. We just lost Mr. Aaron a couple months ago. Again, I think in January of this year. Came up again from the Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro Leagues. And Henry Aaron, of course, is known primarily for breaking two of baseball's most coveted records. In April of 1974, he broke Babe Ruth's career all-time home run list, 714 home runs. He wound up his career with the Milwaukee Brewers at 755, 3,771 hits in that career. Perennial all-star, and a real ambassador for the game up until the time that he began to really get more frail with age. Widely appreciated and beloved ambassador to the game, who literally would travel from stadiums to stadium, preaching the benefits of baseball. And then finally, Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper. This is another kind of Americana story that resonated with me when I first started to follow his career. He played before my time, so I never really saw him play. But he came up with the Yankees in 1936, just after Lou Gehrig had, or just around the time Lou Gehrig was winding down his career, and he played until 1951. He's known primarily for a 56-game hitting streak in the 1941 series, but also he made baseball look easy. He was described as being as graceful as a gazelle in center field in New York, and an easy swing. Became a folk hero in New York. But maybe as importantly, he came up at a time when there was a tremendous amount of discrimination against immigrants in general, and Italian immigrants in particular. And Joe DiMaggio was the son of Italian immigrant fishermen from San Francisco. And because of his character, because of his exploits on the field, because of the way he conducted himself, DiMaggio became an American icon. And in many respects, we don't use the term anymore of assimilation, but he really kind of took the stigma off Italian immigrants and became an American baseball icon. So much so that you may remember Paul Simon wrote a song in which he asks the famous question that where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? A nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Jolton Joe has left and gone away. So became kind of a folk hero, a folk song, not a folk song, but a big hit. It was a movie song written for The Graduate in the 1960s. People would ask Joe DiMaggio what he thought of the song. His response was, "I have no idea what the guy was even talking about." And in his later years, and this is kind of sad, he became those guys never made much money compared to what players are earning today. So he became a pitch man for Mr. Coffee, coffee brewers. And they're Gen X and Gen Y people know him primarily as Mr. Coffee. They would show his picture on the television, and people would say, "There's Mr. Coffee." They wouldn't remember Joe DiMaggio, the great Yankee Clipper. So I'm up against my 30-minute limit, but I thought we'd close with the font of all baseball wisdom. This is Yogi Berra, the great catcher from the New York Yankees. Yogi Berra, Casey Stengel, his manager, said was the best athlete that ever played for him. Not Mickey Mantle, not some of the others, but Yogi Berra. He caught in the major league, probably the best catcher in the history of the major league. Caught from 1946 until, I guess he stopped really catching on a day-to-day basis around 1959, 1960. 10-time World Series champion. Nobody has ever won more World Series championships than Yogi Berra. An 18-time All-Star and a 3-time most valuable player of the American League. However, he's probably best known today for Yogiisms, his malapropisms and hilarious quotes. I understand that after the Bible and after Shakespeare, Yogi Berra is the most oft-quoted person in American letters, if you can call it that. And here's a compilation of some of his most famous lines. On Yogi Berra Day in St. Louis, I'd like to thank you for making this day necessary. I knew I was going to take the wrong train, so I left early. You better cut that pizza in 4 pieces because I'm not hungry enough to eat 6. Okay. It's impossible to get a conversation going. Everybody was talking too much. And my all-time favorite, you should always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. So with that, I would remind everyone that we're 2 days away from the real game of baseball being played. You can put these musings away for another year. And if you have any comments or questions, I'd be certainly happy to indulge them. Sam, I'll pass that back to you as I stop the screen share at this point.
Well, thank you, Dr. McGovern. That was fantastic. Certainly brought me back to my childhood. And so now we're going to move to some questions. And so if you have questions, the chat is open. Please, feel free to drop your questions right in the chat, and I'll read them aloud for Dr. McGovern. And while you do that, Dr. McGovern, a question just off the top of my head. You, in the introduction and in your bio, you said that you were a Dodgers fan up until they moved to Los Angeles. What happened?
Well, my father was from Ireland, and he was almost all of our family except my immediate family got off the boat from Ireland and stayed in New York. And when they found out that Walter O'Malley owned the Dodgers, we all had to become Brooklyn Dodgers fans because Walter O'Malley was one of us. Well, then O'Malley in 1957 packed up, deserted Brooklyn, and moved the team to Los Angeles. So in New York, I can vaguely remember, but I do remember that the New York Daily News one time did a survey asking, who were the most notorious people in history. And the answer to that question, number 1 was Hitler, number 2 was Stalin, and number 3 was Walter O'Malley. So with the Dodgers in Los Angeles, I do remember, I was just a small child, but I do remember watching the 55 and 56 World Series games on television with the family all cheering for the Dodgers. But then the Dodgers were gone, and they've now been in Los Angeles longer than they were in Brooklyn. So we switched over to the Phillies at that point. And I pretty much, you can tell from the hat, I pretty much watched the Phillies from that point on. However, I lived in the Bronx almost within the lights. You could see the lights from Yankee Stadium out my apartment window for a number of years. And we had a fellow on the staff of the college whose brother was a sales manager at Channel 5 and who used to get us primo box seats at Yankee Stadium. So I was there when Derek Jeter was there. I was there when Roger Clemens was there, David Wells, Paul O'Neill, Tino Martinez, Chuck Knobloch, Jorge Posada, all those great Yankee teams of the 90s. And it was pretty tough not to root for them. You know, they were a great bunch of players. And so during those years, I rooted for the Yankees, except in the 2008 World Series when they played the Phillies. I did come home and root for the Phils during that one. But that's the saga there, Sam.
Oh my goodness. I think, you know, I spent a lot of time in Ohio, and Cleveland Browns fans in the NFL feel the exact same about
Yeah,
Baltimore
yeah,
and the Modell family out there. So
yeah. I'm
I
sure they
certainly
do.
understand that. Dr. McGovern, question for you. You talked a little bit about pop culture. So much of baseball is integrated. It's called the Great American Pastime, and so much of it ends up in our movies. Do you have a favorite or a ranking of favorite baseball films?
Yeah, I do. I've always liked The Natural.
Okay.
Uh, you saw the theme of my presentation this morning. I tend to interpret baseball in Arthurian terms, you know, uh, and I like kind of the the mythic aspects of the game. And of course, Bernard Malamud's novel was poorly translated into film. At the end of the book, Roy Hobbs dies at home plate, you know, but you can't have that when Robert Redford is in the movie. However, that aside, I thought uh, the acting in that film was superb, and I thought Redford did a pretty good job of swinging a bat and throwing a ball like he knew what he was doing. So many of them don't. Eight Men Out, a John Sayles film, was another baseball film that I liked, which was about the 1919 Black Sox scandal, in which the eight members of the Chicago White Sox were accused of throwing the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds, and that's a really good and as Hollywood goes, pretty close to accurate Hollywood film. And then the other one, which professional baseball players tell me is very close to being accurate, is Bull Durham, which is about the
Hmm.
minor leagues. I guess in AAA, I think the Durham Bulls still play the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs up here. But they tell me a lot of that film is right on the money as far as life in the minor leagues is concerned.
Wow. Uh, Amy Sams, who works for us here at the Center for Civic Engagement, Civic Community Engagement, she says I'm a fan of Bad News Bears, which I think is a lot. I think Bad News Bears and Angels in the Outfield are a lot of young people's introduction to the world of baseball.
Yeah, I remember Angels in the Outfield very well. Yeah, but that was fun.
A question here: what was the first Major League Baseball game that you ever saw?
1956, Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia. I went down with my father, my grandfather, and some other friends from Bethlehem to see them play the St. Louis Cardinals. It was a night game, and Connie Mack Stadium sits in North Philadelphia at 21st Street and Lehigh Avenue. And, it's really urban, very tight, lots of row houses, and all those old ballparks were built, along the lines that Updike describes with those irregularities. And they had one parking lot. First car in was the last one out. Everybody got parked in together, So the way we did this, you'd go down at noontime. This is for a 7 o'clock game. Go down at noontime, park the car. So you'd be the first one in the lot. Walk out to Broad Street, which was about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 blocks out Lehigh or 21st Street to Broad. Take the subway down to City Hall, and there was a Horn and Hard Art automat. Most people don't even know what that is, but it was a coin opera. There was a series of vending machines in which you put your coins in and get a sandwich or a piece of pie out. So we'd all have lunch at the Horn and Hard Art automat at Broad and Market in Philadelphia, then climb back on the subway, back up to Connie Mack Stadium, and you'd get there just about the time that the players were arriving at the stadium. So if you want, if we wanted autographs, that was the time to grab them when the players were going in. I remember the game too because Stan Musial played in that game, the great Hall of Famer from Donora, Pennsylvania, and he hit a foul ball that the guy in front of me caught. I thought the guy was going to faint with ecstasy that he had a foul ball hit by Stan Musial, who was in the twilight of his. So the game was memorable, and they closed that stadium in 1970. But I saw a lot of baseball games there before they moved down to South Philadelphia. But that was the very first one. You never forget the first one. And the other thing you never forget about it is how green the grass was. I had never seen grass that green. All those old ballparks, they look like factories from the outside. They didn't look like baseball fields. And you'd go in and be, all these old rafters and I-beams and things, but you could see you could see the grass of the infield and the outfield. And that just really stuck with me.
Yeah, you certainly never forget your first baseball game. I
No.
certainly kind of forgot mine. But another question for you: you talked about your favorite teams. Who has been your favorite player past? And then if it is someone from the past, who is someone that you enjoy watching now?
Well, I don't get to see him much because he plays on the West Coast, but I've seen him a couple of times. I've seen him live. We were out in Seattle one night and I caught a game out there. Mike Trout from the Angels, I think, is probably maybe the most talented guy that's out there now. I've seen Jacob deGrom pitch from the Mets a couple times, and that kid he's up there throwing 101 miles an hour. And you watch major league hitters swing late on pitches like that, and he's pretty impressive as well. The past, of course, Clemente was one that kind of stuck with me. I have one minor regret. We happened to be in Pittsburgh the night that he got his 3,000th hit, and we had a family conflict, and we were going to go down to the game, and then the relatives came, and we didn't get to the. Well, that would have been the last time anybody would have seen Clemente play, Yeah. So, and of course, I'm just fascinated with all the Ruth and Gehrig lore of the 1920s during the golden age when, Babe Ruth could sell out Yankee Stadium and in that era. Another contemporary player that I like, he's retired several years now, but I think Derek Jeter from the Yankees is one that kind of, I always like watching him play, and then Chase Utley from the Phillies as well.
Yeah. Bit of a controversial question, but it's probably one of the more popular questions in baseball. Pete Rose and the ban from baseball, and of course the whole controversy of should he be in the Hall of Fame. What's your take? Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame, and should his ban from baseball be lifted?
Well, I guess they're two separate questions. I don't know how he can get into the Hall of Fame with the ban not being lifted. The last time I looked, that notation said permanently ineligible.
Yeah.
Okay. And I try to be a compassionate person. They never let Shoeless Joe Jackson in, and Shoeless Joe again was a member of the 1919 Black Sox. A lot of evidence suggests he had no idea what he was doing. And on top of that, if you look at his numbers in the World Series, they were really good. I mean, it didn't look to me like he was throwing any games. They didn't let him back in. Rose, every time there's a change in the commissioner's office, a new commissioner will come in, promising to rethink, relook at the Rose case. Every time they look at the data, which we don't know, they say no. Apparently he was doing some really awful stuff with that gambling. So again, I think the lore of the game is that he's permanently ineligible, and I'd probably go along with that.
Fair enough. Other questions? Again, we have a little bit more time, so if you have other questions for Dr. McGovern, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Thank you for the questions so far. Dr. McGovern, I'll throw out a question while we're seeing if anyone else has one. Some people, baseball fans, their life goal is to visit every ballpark in America. Yeah. How many have you been to? And is that something that you want?
Yeah, I haven't made them all, but I've been to a lot. I've been to some that aren't there anymore. Olympic Stadium in Montreal. I was there. I've been to Toronto, Seattle, the new Seattle Stadium. I've been to Candlestick Park. I've been to Candlestick. Well, that's no longer there. I haven't been in the Pacific Bell or whatever it's called now. I think that might be the only ones that count. I was at the Astrodome. So I was there, Busch Stadium in St. Louis, Wrigley Field, the old Comiskey Park, not the new one in Chicago, the old Pittsburgh Stadium, which I guess would have been Three Rivers Stadium. I was there several times. Orioles Stadium and Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. Been to that one. And again, that was one of those goals of mine for a while too. But when we travel now, it's kind of tough dragging my wife in to see baseball games all the time. So. However, the last time we were in Seattle, I dragged her to a game out there because I wanted to see the new ballpark there, and she enjoyed it. That's where I saw Mike Trout play.
Nice. Very nice. And then a follow-up to that,
Albert Pujols played in that game too.
Oh wow, two future Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up question here. Given that question, what is your favorite baseball stadium, past or present? And then what do you have a favorite stadium food?
A favorite what?
Stadium food.
Oh yeah, I do. I'll do the second one first. My favorite stadium food are the bratwursts in Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee, it's Miller Park now, but I was at County Stadium in Milwaukee. Best ballpark food ever in Milwaukee. I've had cheesesteaks in Philadelphia too, but even they can't compare to the bratwurst in Milwaukee. Favorite stadium is probably one I haven't been in yet. That's Fenway Park. But I remember going to the old Comiskey Park in Chicago, which is right next to America Park now in the south side of Chicago. And you were so close to the field there that when the pitcher was throwing curveballs, you could see the spin on the curveball. That's how close you were to the field. Been to Wrigley Field, and I was a little disappointed in Wrigley Field because proximity to the field and sight lines is one of the criteria that I would use for liking a place. And I didn't think they were that hot, really. I've been in others where I thought I was closer to the action. And of course, I've always liked Yankee Stadium. I just like the atmosphere, the noise, the energy there is unparalleled. In fact, if you like sitting and watching a ball game, you won't like Yankee Stadium because they all stand up. They're standing up in front of you the whole game. So if you want to watch the game, you better stand up.
Fair enough. Other questions? Again, please feel free to drop them in chat. While we do that, Dr. McGovern, do you have a prediction for this upcoming season? Who do you think is going to? Who do you think will see playing in the World Series?
Well, if you look, I think the Dodgers will be there. I think the Dodgers might be the best team in baseball. But things happen during the year, so. And I think the Yankees. I think if the Yankees can stay healthy, I think this is the year they make it again. They haven't won a world title since they won one here in Philadelphia in 2009. So this might be their best shot.
Yeah, that's probably one of the longer droughts in their history.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they're stuck on 27 titles right now, which they proudly behind home plate. They've got a banner that they put up. 27-time world champions or whatever.
Yeah. Somehow I don't feel bad for their 27 titles.
No. It's hard to feel sorry for the New York Yankees,
Yeah.
I mean, I can. This is a long time ago, but I can't remember what sports writer wrote it, but he said, rooting for the New York Yankees is like rooting for General Motors. Today they would say Amazon. Rooting for the Yankees is like rooting for Amazon or Walmart.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, well, it seems like there are no other questions, so we will draw this to a close. But Dr. McGovern, thank you. This was, for me, a trip down memory lane. One of my favorite pastimes, and I know for many of us here, thoroughly enjoyed your talk. Again, remember, opening day is coming this week, and so America's Pastime is back. But thank you all for joining us.
I heard the tickets are $300, by the way, in Philadelphia if you want to go. So. I'm going to pass. Television's a lot cheaper.
Yeah. And you don't have to stand the whole game.
That's right. Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed being here with you, and thanks for those that hung in. And it's not often that people just give you an opportunity to bloviate for 50 minutes without real accountability. So thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. McGovern. We appreciate it. And for everyone, we have our next Spartan Talk is coming up in a week and a half on April the 8th. And Rachel Gorchov from our art department will be joining us to talk about her process through art. Those of you who know Professor Gorchov, in addition to teaching here, she actually operates an art gallery in New York City, and she'll be introducing us into that world and that process, behind the scenes tour, if you will, of what professional art looks like. And so we'll be setting out that invitation, but it'll be April the 8th, 11 a.m. right here on this channel. And so we hope to see you back then. Again, Dr. McGovern, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. We wish all of you a wonderful rest of the week.
Take care.